Warrington Street looked ordinary from the outside. Quiet streets, frosted cars, nothing to hint at what was really unfolding. But beneath that calm, a multi-million-pound drug empire was operating in plain sight. The operators weren't moving bags on corners. They were running an organization with reach, discipline, and power that most people in town never saw coming. Police had been watching for months, every delivery, each face, and every van, waiting for the right moment. Not to catch a deal, but to dismantle the entire command chain. Because the men behind it weren't corner boys. They were something else entirely. Here, Crime Pulse has taken a closer look at the Cullen brothers' criminal operations behind locked doors, business fronts, and how Leon Cullen managed to evade the police for so long. Welcome to Crime Pulse. If you're new here, hit subscribe and join our growing community, digging into the UK's most dangerous criminal underworlds. Like, share, and turn on notifications so you never miss a case. Leon Cullen became one of the Northwest's most wanted men, leading a £300,000 a month cocaine and firearm trafficking ring with his twin brother before he fled to Dubai. Cullen was linked to a string of gun and grenade attacks as he sought to maintain control of his criminal empire. He spent 2 years at large before he was detained in the United Arab Emirates in January 2020. Before his demise, as law enforcement caught up with him, Cullen and his twin brother Anthony, who had worked their way up through criminal circles before solidifying their organized crime group's position in the Northwest, earned vast profits. The brothers ran their professional gang like a business, with wage bills and bonuses to keep their employees loyal and motivated. But they also attracted attention through their lucrative spending on supercars and expensive holidays, and an investigation was launched by Cheshire Constabulary, who repeatedly targeted the gang. But let's go back to where it all began for the Cullen twins, the path that would turn them into architects of one of the Northwest's most powerful criminal networks. Longford sat on the northern edge of Warrington. Rows of red brick homes, broken curbs, and the quiet tension of a town caught between two cities. Liverpool to the west, Manchester to the east. It wasn't Gangland, but you didn't have to go far to find it. Leon and Anthony Cullen were born here in the summer of 1987. Identical twins, but sharply different temperaments. Anthony was described as being level-headed and popular, the smoother one. The type teachers said had potential. He stayed calm, smiling, and stayed out of trouble, at least where people could see. Leon was known to be a volatile character, intense, and quick to anger. As a teenager, he bounced between being the life of the party and the one to fear. But what they shared was ambition and loyalty. You never saw one without the other. From the schoolyard to Friday night bus rides, they moved like a unit. Their parents weren't criminals with no gang ties, but the streets didn't care. During the late 90s, the Northwest drug trade was exploding. Manchester and Liverpool were bleeding turf wars into surrounding towns, and Warrington felt the pressure. Class A drugs, highly addictive substances like cocaine and heroin, classified as the most dangerous under UK law, were everywhere. And the people pushing them didn't look poor. Flash watches, BMWs, and designer jackets. The dealers looked like stars. The Cullen twins were watching. They started small, but even in those early moves, there was calculation. They wanted more. Not just the money, but the structure, the reputation, the control. By 18, they were done playing small. They were building contacts, quiet ones, mostly through Liverpool. And every mistake they saw another dealer make, they learned from it. They weren't going to be reckless. They were going to be professional. And they were only just getting started. By their early 20s, the Cullen twins had stepped up. They weren't just shifting bags for someone else. They were running things carefully and through people they trusted. Leon masterminded an 18-man drugs cartel, which shipped at least 5 kilograms of cocaine worth around £300,000 across the Northwest over the course of 6 months. Their first front was called Spot On Signs. On paper, it was a print and signage company. Logos, banners, and branded gear. But inside, it was the cover for a growing Class A drug operation. A place to move money, hide stock, and keep things looking clean. They kept records, spreadsheets on a laptop which was later seized from the front company, detailing debts of nearly £100,000 owed by other dealers. Who owed what, how much had moved, and what still had to be paid. Everything was recorded and had its place. It was a business, and they ran it like one, but the police were watching simultaneously. In late 2010, Cheshire police launched Operation Cortex, a full-scale covert investigation. Surveillance teams, informants, and undercover officers all worked to track what the Cullen brothers had built. They found stash houses, burner phones, and safe locations. Couriers made regular runs from Liverpool into Warrington. Leon stayed in the background. He didn't handle the drugs himself, but he gave the orders and made the decisions. In early 2011, police carried out raids across Warrington. They searched several properties and found cocaine, cash, phones, and detailed records. The records were key. They showed who worked where, who owed what, and who answered to whom. Leon was arrested and later convicted of conspiracy to supply Class A drugs. Prosecutors said he ran the whole thing as a central figure in the region's supply line. He was sentenced to 9 years and 8 months. Operation Cortex ultimately saw members of the organized crime group imprisoned for nearly 100 years. Anthony wasn't picked up at first. He stepped in during Leon's absence, kept things moving, but it didn't last. Within a year, a second police operation brought him down too. He was found at a processing site in a caravan fitted with equipment, scales, and blocks of high-purity product. Anthony was sentenced to 5.5 years. The police thought they'd written the final chapter on the Cullen brothers, but behind bars, the twins were already planning their next move, and it wouldn't look anything like the first. By 2015, both Cullen brothers were out. No mess, no noise, just a return to business. But this time, it was different. They'd learned from the first fall. No direct involvement, no visible wealth. It would be more organized and harder to trace. Re-entering the drugs trade almost immediately upon their respective releases from prison. A fresh police investigation centering on the Cullens opened in 2016. It found a monthly wage bill of £50,000 plus bonuses of up to £10,000 and accommodation incentives also offered for so-called employees. The new front was called Future Press Limited. This time, a whole different trade. On paper, it looked like a promotional goods company. T-shirts, branded merchandise, marketing kits. But in reality, it was a cover for laundering money. And behind it all, a network that stretched beyond Warrington. From Merseyside and Greater Manchester to North Wales and the North East, the structure was tighter than before. Leon kept out of sight, acting more like a director than a dealer. Anthony ran day-to-day operations, personnel, logistics, security. Trusted lieutenants managed transport, storage, and movement. Enforcers dealt with problems quickly and without warning. This time, they paid wages monthly with bonuses. There were rules, expectations, and penalties. They moved the product with precision. High purity, Class A drugs, better than most of what was already on the street. They didn't cut or dilute it. That purity gave them an edge, which buyers noticed, and so did their rivals. At its height, the network was making up to £290,000 a month. This wasn't just cash stuffed in boxes. It was cleaned, managed, and put back into the business. And behind it all was a plan to stay hidden. No online presence, no names on anything. They used encrypted phones, changed vehicles often, and moved between safe houses. Even the storage locations were swapped regularly, always trying to keep distance between themselves and the product. Leon splashed the cash on a luxury Maserati as his outfit supplied more than 50 kilograms of cocaine over the course of 18 months. It wasn't just the Cullen twins. Beneath them was a core group, each with a clear role, each hand-picked for trust. Some were family, some were friends. All of them played a part. At the center with the brothers was Chris Hayton, the man trusted with weapons. Rifles, handguns, shotguns, grenades, even silencers. He made sure the network always had muscle when it needed it. Shah Ryan operated on the enforcement side, the one who kept people quiet, kept payments coming, and reminded anyone who stepped out of line exactly who they were dealing with. Matthew Spencer, Nigel Girk, and Chris Potter handled transport and logistics. They moved large sums of cash across counties and kept the flow between stash houses, couriers, and the main operation running smooth. Others kept the support layers in place. Steve Cowell, Robert Beebe, and Michael Mason ran safe flats, stored product, and shifted gear when called. For movement and delivery, the gang relied on Josh Mercer, Steve Wood, and Christopher LaRosa, while Dylan McCann, Liam King, and Gary White worked flexibly across different roles, stepping in wherever the network needed them. Jason East, Sammy Hadry, and Scott Quinn often acted as backup. The second layer of security for risky moves. Andrew McElligott and Thomas Hill stayed low profile, watching drop locations and managing handovers in the shadows. Others, like Jamie Oldroyd and the Cullens' own nephew Lewis Turner, filled in the gaps, proving that blood and loyalty both had a place in the structure. They worked in fragments. One task, one name, one van. That design kept the operation secure. If something slipped, only a small piece was exposed, and that's how the Cullen cartel stayed running, through discipline, division, and silence. But the Cullens' precision didn't go unnoticed. To detectives in Cheshire, this wasn't just another gang, it was something far more dangerous. And it would take one of the most resource-heavy investigations in the force's history to bring it down. It started quietly, and by 2016, police knew something serious was operating in Warrington, but movements were too precise. Money was moving fast, and there were no mistakes, no obvious trails. They needed more than suspicion. They needed structure. That's when Operation Samurai began. Cheshire Police launched it as a deep surveillance mission, long-term, resource-heavy, and aimed directly at the Cullen brothers. Over 18 months, officers tracked the network piece by piece. Couriers, vehicles, and their delivery patterns. Meetings that lasted minutes, drop-offs where nothing changed hands, but everything moved. Phones were monitored, addresses recorded and watched again and again. They watched men enter flats empty-handed and leave with bags. They watched vans leaving and returning with different plates. It was methodical, and the brothers never touched the gear. No one knew the full chain except the Cullens. The deeper police dug, the clearer the scale became. This wasn't just a Warrington operation, it fed into something bigger. Intelligence began to link the Cullens to Liverpool's Tobin brothers, Alan and John, the masterminds behind a national drug supply network. Police watched a quiet meeting in the countryside involving Anthony Cullen, John Tobin, Robbie Broughton, and Robert Beebe. There were no drugs or money exchanged, just a calm conversation over tea with a van parked nearby. The surveillance was done, warrants were signed, phones were tapped, safe houses were mapped. The brothers' empire, built in silence, was about to be dismantled in one coordinated strike. The strikes came fast. On the morning of January 10th, 2018, Cheshire Police moved in. Operation Samurai had run for more than a year. Now it was time to end the Cullens operation. A series of dawn raids saw 19 properties in Warrington searched and 18 men arrested. Entry teams hit properties at the same time, safe houses, stash flats, and transport points without warnings or knock and wait. Anthony Cullen was arrested without incident. He didn't run. Police found him at one of the key properties identified during Operation Samurai. His arrest was one of the first, a crucial step that signaled the collapse of the leadership. But while Anthony was in custody, his twin brother was already gone, having fled to the European mainland. Chris Hayton, the gang's armorer, was arrested next. Inside his flat, officers found multiple firearms, pistols, automatic rifles, and silencers hidden behind a false wall. It confirmed everything police already suspected. This wasn't just a drug crew. It was armed, structured, and dangerous. More than £200,000 in cash and 3 kilograms of drugs were seized from the second iteration Cullen gang, as was the largest cache of working firearms discovered in Cheshire Police's history. These guns were made available for other gangs to hire for thousands of pounds, or to purchase for more. One was linked to a shooting on Rose Avenue in Bootle in 2015, when bullets were fired at a living room when the occupant was home. Shah Ryan was found days later. He'd been seen watching one of the Cullen safe locations without drawing attention. Police moved in and took him and the drugs. Matthew Spencer had already been stopped on the A1, caught with £14,950 in cash hidden under floor panels in his van. Nigel Girk was arrested separately, caught carrying £43,700 in cash zipped into a sports bag. No explanation was given. As the raids expanded, more names were picked up. Chris Potter, Josh Mercer, Gary White, and Michael Mason were arrested in homes and vehicles across the northwest. Robert Beebe, considered one of the Cullen gang's inner circles, was also detained, quickly moved into protective custody as tensions escalated. Search teams recovered encrypted handsets, burner phones, substantial quantities of high-purity cocaine, along with drug ledgers and movement schedules. In multiple addresses, they found concealed compartments, false floors, hidden wall panels, and magnetized trapdoors. The police didn't just want the product, they wanted the people, the roles, the system. And with each arrest, the map became clearer. The operation was no longer just a network. It was evidence stacked, labeled, and building towards court. But Operation Samurai didn't stop there. 7 months later, on August 2nd, 2018, police targeted the Cullens supply chain. On the M6 motorway, a major UK highway running through Cheshire, officers intercepted a van near Knutsford. Hidden in a false floor was the largest land seizure of cocaine in UK history. 186 kilograms of 90% pure cocaine, worth over £20 million. The drugs, linked to the Tobins and destined for Warrington gangs like the Cullens remnants, further exposed the national network and piled massive debts on its operators. With the gang dismantled, it looked like the empire had finally fallen. But there was one problem. The man pulling strings in the shadows had vanished without a trace. While Anthony Cullen and the rest of the gang were arrested during the January 2018 raids, Leon Cullen was nowhere to be found. Police believed he'd slipped out just days before the operation began. He didn't leave a trace. No phone, no bank trail, no digital presence. Surveillance turned up nothing. Warrants were issued. International alerts followed. But for months, there was silence. Leon had always kept himself a step removed, not just from the product, but from exposure. No social media, no flashy profile. Most of the gang didn't have direct access to him. He moved through intermediaries, which made tracking him harder. The theory was simple. He had fled abroad. But where? Police worked with national and international agencies, Europol, Interpol, Border Control. An absent Leon found himself name-checked in court during several high-profile trials. Efforts to detain Leon, including a £5,000 reward offered by Crime Stoppers and a van bearing his mugshot being parked outside the Halliwell-Jones Stadium on a Warrington Wolves match day, had finally borne fruit. He had spent a considerable period of time in Spain under a false identity and with a fake passport around early 2019. Bit by bit, fragments emerged. A pattern of aliases, forged documents, and rented properties. Not enough to act, but enough to keep the net open. It took nearly 2 years. Then, in early 2020, a lead came in. Leon had been spotted in Dubai, living under a false identity, renting a flat in a high-rise block. Surveillance confirmed it, and officers coordinated with Emirati authorities. Only a handful of images of Cullen emerged during his time on the run, one showing him posing for a selfie in the mirror of a lift while clutching a Louis Vuitton man bag and wearing a flashy watch. His appearance was vastly different to that on his wanted poster. As the 2-year anniversary of his escape approached, detectives finally got their man. The arrest was swift. He didn't resist. He was detained at gunpoint and spent 13 months in custody in the UAE, where conditions for prisoners are notoriously harsh. For the first 4 days, he was left alone with a hood on his head in a darkened room before being transferred to a cell where 50 other inmates were residing. His head was shaved and he was forced to wear robes and sandals. He was regularly assaulted by the guards and was not even allowed access to basics such as toothpaste, leaving Cullen forced to brush his teeth with soap. He was flown back to the UK under armed escort, where he admitted to conspiracy to supply firearms, conspiracy to possess firearms and ammunition, and conspiracy to supply cocaine. The man who had once sat at the top of one of Britain's most structured drug cartels was finally behind bars. His return changed everything. With both Cullen brothers in custody, the final phase began, building the case that would take them and their network to court. The takedown didn't end the violence. After the January 2018 raids, Warrington didn't get quieter, it got worse. With the Cullen network arrested, their grip on the local drug trade collapsed, leaving a power vacuum. Rivals saw opportunity. Safe houses were hit, couriers vanished, and families were watched. The message was clear. Territory was up for grabs. Police recorded a spike in targeted violence. In February 2018, a grenade was planted under a car on Cleveland Road in Oxford, a chilling warning tied to Leon Cullen's associates. Months later, arsons torched gyms and homes linked to the gang, while rivals tried to frame each other by planting weapons and cocaine. The violence only escalated. In November 2019, shootings left men bleeding in the streets, but the most shocking came in January 2020, when a Cullen associate carrying a child ran zigzag through a park to dodge bullets fired from a grey Audi, later found burned out. Even in April 2020, explosives were still being planted in gardens. For Warrington, violence filled the void left by the Cullens. But while rivals fought in the streets, the justice system was preparing its own final move, the trials that would decide the brothers' fate. May 14, 2021, Liverpool Crown Court. The prosecution presented a formidable case. It was a portrait of an organised criminal corporation operating across the northwest and beyond. The defence response varied. Leon Cullen, appearing by video link, claimed he wasn't directly involved in day-to-day operations and that his Rolex and designer items were personal possessions, not evidence of large-scale crime. Others argued they were peripheral players, unaware of the wider conspiracy. These defences carried little weight with the court. The judge described the enterprise as a sophisticated, well-planned, and persistent criminal operation. Wholesale supply of high-purity cocaine, a lethal cache of firearms, and intimidation that rattled the local community. He began with Anthony Cullen, 33, labeling him a co-founder and logistics leader. Anthony received 27 years in prison. Next came Chris H. Ton, the gang's appointed armorer, sentenced to 20 years. Leon Cullen, 33, was identified as the strategic head who pulled strings from a distance and facilitated the network. He received a sentence of 22 years and 6 months. But Cullen was brought back before Liverpool Crown Court the following year for a hearing under the Proceeds of Crime Act. The court heard Cullen personally benefited to the tune of £350,000 from the OCG and was ordered to repay a total of nearly £23,000, comprising cash and the Rolex watch. Robert Beebe, a lieutenant involved in enforcement and logistics, received 13 years. Shah Ryan, linked to intimidation and debt collection, was handed 14 years. Matthew Spencer, responsible for moving large sums of money, got 12 years. Nigel Girk was given 11 years. Chris Potter, Josh Mercer, Gary White, and Michael Mason, who managed transport and stash operations, were sentenced individually to terms ranging from 10 to 12 years. The combined sentencing total exceeded 185 years across all defendants. The sentences reflected both the scale of the conspiracy and each member's significance, undeniably dismantling what had operated like a drug and gun cartel. Detective Inspector Rob Balfour of Cheshire Police's Serious and Organised Crime Unit said, "The criminal activity run by the Cullens has earned them and others at the top end of the organised crime group a considerable amount of money, from which they have lived a lavish lifestyle for a short time. We will keep utilising this legislation, so not only do criminals have to complete lengthy sentences, their earned assets are removed, and their lives post-sentence are affected by further financial restrictions until they have literally paid their debt to society." What do you think of the Cullen case? Did the sentencing fit the scale of the operation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more real UK crime stories like this, subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay with us. There's always another case to uncover.